Hi everyone, welcome to the Sustainable Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest Anders. Anders, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Tom. My name is Anders Lillevik. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Point, and we do procurement orchestration and procurement management as a software as a service solution.
Great. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So I think that's kind of flavor of the month, I think, to some extent, that everyone is sort of into the orchestration thing. But essentially, what the company was set out to do was solve the complexity of modern procurement, right? So when I started in procurement 25 years ago, it was all about saving money and, basically take huge categories of spend, consolidate them down, negotiate good deals, and, you're a champion.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, things started happening with suppliers. So we had supplier failures, we started getting regulation. And all of a sudden, procurement needed to validate financial stability assessment of their suppliers, do risk assessments, and all these kinds of things. So it went from saving the company money to saving the company from bad actors, essentially, right? And now fast forward to 2024, we also have to save the world. So it's about making sure that you are doing business with folks that don't pollute, make sure that they are not hiring slaves, literally, make sure that they're not using single-use plastics, and on and on and on. And the challenge with most procurement platforms is that it can't handle that level of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that every box has been checked before signing that contract has become a management nightmare. So what we do is we basically set up processes for individual companies that can ensure that all the right things are getting done by the right people at the right time, so that when, number one, you sign the contract, you have confidence, but you can also manage your teams. You can see what everyone's working on. You can track performance. You can do all sorts of great things because you have that visibility of what's going on in your organization.
Okay, cool. That sounds really good. Why? As in, why did you go and set this up? What was your kind of light bulb moment that, you woke up one morning and said, I know I should start this company, Focal Point, and do what we're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So I've been in procurement, like I said, for a few years, right? And I bought and implemented a lot of solutions out there. And I kind of just accepted the fact that we needed to work in Excel and email, because it was just like there were no solutions out there to do that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until I was consulting for a very large manufacturing company and I helped them select the source to pay suite. We spent 4 months going through the RFP process, a typical procurement stuff, right? And I was having a cold beverage with the head of procurement as I was rolling off the project. And he said, look, I'm so happy that you came. I can't wait to get this solution up and running. It's going to be great. Everything's going to be on system. And I was like, well, maybe not so much. He goes, what do you mean? I said, well, here are all the things you still need to manage, manually, poorly, and in Excel. And he was none too pleased with that. He goes, how can this be? I'm going to spend all this money and still manage all my expletive word in Excel? I'm like, yeah, that's really truth. And that's a penny drop moment for me. Like, I've been suffering through it for so many years. And now, this person is just about to start suffering through it as well. And there has to be a better way. And, the rest of this thing is history, right? My first real investor is my wife. So I went to her and said, I got this idea. And, I'm going to give up my lucrative career in procurement and making nothing for a number of years. And hopefully I'll make it, but I probably won't. But, she said, if you don't do it now, you never will. Go off and do it. So, it's been great.
And how long have you been in business and how's it going?
So we've been in business now for almost 4 years. So I incorporated in March of 2020. And,
an interesting part, incorporating a company.
Yeah. The world was not shut down when I filed the paperwork, but by the time I got my incorporation letter, the world has shut down entirely. But, it was not a bad time actually, because, you're kind of heads down doing the work you need to do. And, development people like to sit in the basement anyway. So for them, they didn't really change much. But the good thing for us is that we didn't have to travel to sell. And we were able to get customers even before product was available. So, once I started talking to people, it resonated with them to say, yeah, I have this problem too. And I got 2 letters of intent signed, 6 months before the product was made available. And once
Wow.
they tried the product, they converted immediately. So that was good. And, what I will say about our customer base is that our customers are large and complex. The solutions that we are selling, it resonates with large organizations that have complex problems and a lot of legacy software that doesn't talk to each other. So we have 3 real Fortune 500 customers, 2 that are Fortune 100. And then we have 2 international customers who would be in the Fortune 500 had they been in the United States. So we're running and gunning, as we say. So we raised a bunch of capital. We have 42 employees globally. So we're off to the races. The 2024 has been a really good year so far. We've closed several deals, and I think right now we're implementing 8 customers at the same time.
Oh, phenomenal. Phenomenal. Congrats on that. I assume, obviously, those customers who have legacy systems that you referred to, because all of your customers, if they are that size, will have many legacy systems often. So I assume you play nicely with them.
We do indeed. As a matter of fact, we lean very heavily into the acquisition of data and also kicking processes off upstream and downstream from our system. So we will integrate with a supplier master data system, with the spend management solution, with their contract management repository, any supplier risk function they have, collect that data and basically consolidate it and use it as part of our processes. So we can, for example, kick off a sourcing process over here by collecting requirements, making sure that you have the right team members, making sure that you have the right suppliers in the process, and then shove that data wholesale into their sourcing tool. Let's say 4 suppliers goes in, 1 supplier comes back, and then we can keep on going down the process of assessing risk, managing contracts, and so on. So we are basically Switzerland as it comes to these things, because we want to make the systems you have work better. And quite honestly, some of these large legacy systems are very hard to take out and replace with something else. So playing nicely really adds to our benefit.
And how important is the data in making those decisions? I assume it's critical, but what kind of data are we talking, and where's it coming from?
So, we kind of tend to look at data in a bunch of different lenses, right? So, but for procurement perspective, like the holy grail is a categories map of information, right? So who are the suppliers in the category? How much money are we spending with them? What percent of them have contracts? How quickly are you paying them? Is that is that according to term? Is it not according to term? Is it according to best practice? So for example, should you be paying your suppliers in 45 days instead of 30 days? I don't know, right? Like, so it's a matter of getting a hold of that information. That data typically sits either in an ERP or a source to pay solution or a plethora of point solutions, right? So you could have, for example, a best of breed solution for contract management and sourcing while, doing a legacy ERP procurement pay process. We don't much care. For us, we play nicely with all of the systems, and we basically integrate through APIs mostly. Sometimes we have to do flat file integration, and we kind of hold our nose and do it, but it's okay.
Sure. And this is the Sustainable Supply Chain podcast, as I mentioned at the start. So where does sustainability come into all this?
So there are a couple of things that we're doing with some interesting customers now. Is they care about things like water and waste usage. They care about single-use plastics and also carbon emissions, right? So what we are essentially doing for this customer is we are taking their spend data, using the spend method to create that carbon footprint initially. And then we can drill down deeper by saying, all right, so we think the spend method carbon emission is this, but now let's look at the actual usage and the contracts and get the supplier to, refine that number. And then they can use that baseline as they are going either to renegotiation or taking something to market, or when they're managing that supplier. So the way that we kind of look at it, having that baseline is awesome. It's good for reporting purposes, but we also enable folks to manage that carbon footprint or their single-use plastics, whatever the case may be, in their supplier management initiatives as well as their sourcing initiatives, so that every time you touch the supplier, this is an opportunity for you to manage that kind of sustainability metrics or whatever it is that you're tracking.
Okay, so can you use, just putting it in simple terms for me, can you use it, for example, to select suppliers? Say I want to buy 100,000 widgets. I have a carbon budget of X and a plastic budget of Y. Can I now look across my suppliers and go, of all these widget suppliers, which are the ones that can get me those widgets at a reasonable price and in my carbon and plastic budget?
That's exactly right. So what we're doing now is we are using the sourcing process to evaluate suppliers or products against all the things that we need to do. Like we talked about the complexity of procurement these days. So yeah, pricing is one thing, delivery is another thing, where the thing is sourced is another thing. And then it comes down to, diversity and inclusion and sustainability and also governance, right? So it's about having that ability to manage all the complexity of a sourcing process or a supplier management process right at your fingertips without having to jump between systems and so on. That's exactly right, Tom.
Okay, and we didn't mention forced labor. Obviously, that's in there as well.
Of course. Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, ESG is such a fungible topic, right? Because it means different things to different people. Yeah, but we're developing and are in the process of having a full ESG suite, as we would call it.
Okay, and obviously, as well, supply chains are, as we know, complex and multi-tiered. How do you handle multiple tiers of suppliers?
So, like you said, it is a complex problem, right? So, at the end of the day, right, most of our customers are in indirect procurement for the most part. Some are indirect. And what we do for the most part is we track which suppliers are critical to our suppliers. So we kind of drill one level down. And number one, we try to look for concentration risk. You say, all right, you're getting, you have 3 tier 1 suppliers, but they all use the same tier 2 suppliers. So you have some concentration risk that you don't even know about. And secondarily, how are the suppliers managing their critical suppliers? That's kind of how we focus on our supplier management methodologies in terms of sustainability. And by and large, for indirect procurement organizations, that's probably more than they need or more than most are thinking about. But as we get into direct, it's a bit more complicated. We have to think about things like bill of lading, bill of materials, what goes into the widget, and so on and so forth as well. So we're not quite there yet, but it is something that we aspire to do once the indirect procurement organization and solution has been fully baked, so to speak.
Okay, and I didn't ask initially, and I should have. Are you specific to an industry, or are you cross industry, and how are you on global reach? Are you in the Americas? Are you America and EMEA? Whereabouts are you reaching?
So we are industry agnostic. So we have financial services customers, insurance customers, we have pharma customers, we have hotel entertainment customers. So from an industry perspective, like we are agnostic, although I will say there's not much I could probably tell people about how to source their direct materials because they do that pretty well already. But they probably have an indirect spend that's fairly chunky as well, but it's certainly not industry specific. Right now, our largest concentration is in the United States, but we also have Asian customers and European customers and a Canadian also. So
Randomly.
we're a 4-year-old company essentially, right? We're a solution with 3 years in market. So we just haven't made a trip to Europe aggressively yet. And that's probably by design.
Okay, well, we're over here, so when you do come over, give me a shout.
Yeah, of course.
What about, I mean, we've referred obliquely to regulations and standards and how those are kind of a moving target. How can companies not just stay compliant with those, but also be leaders in the field?
I think that's interesting, right? Because I think a lot of companies, certainly in this side of the Atlantic, are waiting for regulation to come down before they react to it. Whereas I think our European counterparts are being much more, let's call it religiously aligned with the environment and sustainability. So I think What folks here typically tend to do is maybe look at us across the pond and look over there and see what's coming our way and try to react to it. Then you have some that full throatedly endorse sustainability and ESG and try to get ahead of the curve. The challenge that I think we have over here is we don't know to what metrics or standards we are going to be measured quite yet. And
Mm.
it costs a lot of money to move these kind of things, but I think a lot of companies are just trying to do what the right thing is, and I think that goes a long way of meeting whatever standards are coming down the pike. Doing nothing is certainly not a sustainable point of view.
Yeah, sure, sure, sure. And looking ahead, what kind of trends do you foresee in sustainable procurement, and how should companies kind of embrace these?
Well, I think companies tend to look at things on a project by project basis. And I think that it's not a recipe for success. I think ESG and sustainability needs to be part of how we manage procurement every single solitary day. And it needs to be managed on a program level because it's the right thing to do, rather than saying, okay, now we're going to go out and execute a project to take X% of carbon out, for example. Like I think that's valuable, but it's not a repeatable process. So I think companies need to look at this at a much bigger frame than they are today. I see sometimes, again, certainly on this side of the Atlantic, that sustainability gets buried in with, for example, the supplier diversity and inclusion program.
Mm.
Well, that's great to have a home, but it's probably not the most influential part of the organization. So it's about finding the champion for it and staffing it adequately and then tooling it adequately.
Sure, 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 sure. What about things like balancing cost and sustainability? Because cost often drives procurement, as you alluded to earlier. So, how do you advise companies to balance cost with sustainability goals without compromising either?
Well, I think it's a misnomer, right? Because I think the more efficient companies are, the less pollution they will have and the less waste they will have. And that should also lead to bottom line impacts as well. So I think just getting a hold of the numbers and figuring out if that theory is real is a good first step. And what we're finding is really that as folks get into it, they're not mutually exclusive and they're not always competing as well. Now, if you talk about things like shipping from a closer port, yeah, that's going to bring labor and cost, closer to home, which may actually increase pricing, but you don't have to wait as long. You don't have to pay as much for shipping. So it becomes a balancing act. But knowing what's going on in your supply chain, knowing where the costs are, knowing where the pollution is, and so on and so forth is valuable because then you can actually make those decisions rather than guessing that it's going to be a problem. That makes sense.
Yeah, 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 no, absolutely. We're seeing increasingly global disruptions. I mean, Houthi rebels in the Red Sea, holdups in the Panama Canal due to drought, etc., etc. How should companies build resilience into their procurement to maintain sustainability standards, for example, in those times?
That's a known risk if you actually know it.
Hmm.
And then figuring out what is the alternative path to get your stuff. If the Panama Canal is closed, and as we all know, that's a long journey around. And, either you accept that risk or you don't, but you at least you need to be aware of it in order to be able to manage it. And this is why we're seeing quite a few companies now are moving closer to, their own ports so that there's less risk in shipping stuff around the world and especially around pain points like the Panama Canal and so on.
I'm curious on that front. Just maybe this is something you've seen, maybe you haven't. Just kind of a left field question. But as we're talking about the Panama Canal, I gotta think that's probably impacted U.S. East Coast ports. They're probably seeing an increase in business. I could imagine companies that might have been shipping from West Coast suddenly switching to East Coast to get stuff across the Atlantic. Would that be a fair comment, or am I dreaming?
I don't know. I don't know myself personally, but I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, why not, right? We have some pretty good ports here on the East Coast, so I don't see. I think that's a good theory.
Okay. We'll have to dig into that one. I know you're as you mentioned, 4-year-old company with a product in the market, 3 years. Can you share any customer success stories, particularly as it pertains to sustainability?
Yeah, Tom. So we're currently working with a very large hotel group headquartered in Las Vegas, Nevada. And they're building sustainability and ESG program around managing the water usage, waste, single-use plastics, and carbon footprint. And number one, being able to, like I said earlier, calculate what is your carbon footprint in specific categories. Now, their biggest producer of carbon, for example, is beef, as it tends to be, because they have a lot of restaurants as part of their chain. They're also sourcing sustainable eggs from free-range chickens. So they're following the standards in California, for example, where all the eggs have to come from free range at some point in time, and they're getting ahead of that curve. So being part of that journey about setting up the program, setting up the metrics that they're using to track, and then executing on the goals, using our solution it's been really nice to see. And it's something that has helped us progress our product significantly in terms of how they think about real problems and how they're managing the organization.
Interesting. Just on that, I'm curious, maybe you have an insight into this, maybe you don't. Why are they doing it? Is it something that their customers have asked for? Is it something that their employees have asked for? Is it something that their shareholders are asked for? Their banks, their insurance companies? Are they just really, really nice people?
No, I think this is something that the board of this company has made a priority. They recognize the impact they're having on the environment, and they're going out there and getting ahead of the curve because it's the right thing to do. And it's really inspirational to be working with folks like that because they want to do the thing because it's the right thing to do. They're actually able to attract good talent that feel passionate about these things,
Mhm.
together with business people that can make cost effective decisions at the same time. So for me, it's been great to be part of their journey.
And what's their biggest challenge in doing that? Because if they're kind of leading the space there, they've got to be hitting barriers that others haven't come across yet.
Well, I think that it's about number one, figuring out what to prioritize first. So I think they're starting, I wouldn't say small, but they're starting where it makes sense. They're starting in the protein beef category, for example, and they know that that's their biggest carbon footprint producer. So that's where they're starting, and they're sort of dipping their toe in the water and seeing what they can learn from managing that particular category as it pertains to the metrics I just described. So it's been an interesting journey to see how they prioritize what they go after and how they go after it and getting the results from that. So I think that's what they're doing. They're trying a bunch of stuff, seeing what works, and they're doubling down on what does, and what doesn't work well, they retool and try again, sort of thing.
Okay. And how are their suppliers taking to this shift in direction?
It's an interesting thing because in addition to getting out there and trying to reduce and measure carbon footprint, they're also helping their suppliers understand what needs to go into the management of carbon. So they are making available consultants to help them, the suppliers, I mean, measure and manage their carbon footprint, single-use plastics, and so on and so forth. So I feel that the suppliers know that this is coming across the board, and having the resources and information available to actually improve their own business operations is welcome. Now, obviously, some organizations aren't progressive and they don't really care about it yet.
Mm.
But by and large, I would say it's been very well received by the suppliers.
Interesting. Fascinating. Okay. And where to next for you guys? You're 4 years old now. Where do you see yourselves in 4 years' time? What do you see coming down the line? What kind of directions are you going to head? What are your goals?
So we're passionate about making sure that procurement and supply chain is an interesting place to work that adds value to the organization. So we're going to continue to double down on making solutions and things available that is going to deal with the complexity of procurement, add value, and really elevate the view of procurement in the organizations, right? I've really enjoyed working in procurement. You get to see all the things that are moving in an organization, but for most people, dude, third party costs are typical the second largest expense of a company, second only to HR, sometimes more than HR costs. So maximizing the value of the money that you spend is very, very important. And we're passionate about that. So stay tuned to this channel for more because there's a lot of exciting products and features and functionalities coming.
Nice. Okay, cool. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Anders. Is there any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
Hmm. Well, I think from a procurement perspective and sustainability perspective, what I would say is, results are important, but also is how procurement interacts with the business and suppliers, right? And I think if procurement wouldn't exist without the business stakeholders or the suppliers, and it's important that not necessarily what we do, but also how we do it. And that is making sure that we are being collaborative, we're being open and communicative, and it's really showing what we're doing and making sure that people understand the journey that we're on, so it doesn't become this black box of procurement that people know, right? Because the more things we add to the box, the bigger it gets, and the less likely it is that people understand what the hell is going on.
Sure, sure. If people would like to know more, Anders, about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
So you can go to our website, getfocalpoint.com, or you can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm sure the credentials will be in the podcast.
Yeah, I'll put them in the show notes. Fantastic. Great, Anders. That's been really interesting. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, Tom. Nice to be here.